I am a mathematician by profession, and I live in Alaska. For years, I've maintained a long-standing interest in amateur radio operation. This pursuit aligns well with my analytical inclinations. Radio frequencies, like mathematics, follow distinct patterns and carry embedded information. 15 years ago, while scanning bands on a quiet evening, I intercepted a faint, irregular transmission on an unusually low frequency. It was different from anything I'd encountered, faint pulses interspersed with static, fading in and out unpredictably. At first, I assumed it was environmental interference or remnants of an old, forgotten signal echoing back. However, the signal structure was peculiar, distinct from the random noise or earthbound broadcasts I was accustomed to. Curiosity compelled me to investigate further. I began by isolating key fragments, gradually identifying repeating sequences embedded within the static. The frequency and cadence didn't match any known radio band or established broadcast pattern. To the trained eye, these signals hinted at purposeful encryption, and as someone with a background in cryptography, I recognized a mathematical logic underlying the transmission. Driven by the potential of discovering something rare, or perhaps a rogue transmission, I set to work on decoding it. I could not have foreseen where this would lead. As I delved further into the signal, it became clear that this was no ordinary broadcast. The transmission was sporadic, almost fragmentary, and would often fade to static before re-emerging. Yet, it was persistent. I'd encountered many faint, distant signals over the years, but this one operated on a frequency I didn't recognize, far outside typical commercial or military bands. The consistency of certain rhythmic pulses suggested intentional structure rather than random interference. I began by recording every instance of the transmission, meticulously logging timestamps and noting patterns. Certain segments repeated, though they seemed scrambled or incomplete. The intervals between bursts were inconsistent, but hinted at a sort of coded language or cipher. My experience in cryptography suggested I was dealing with an encrypted message, possibly layered or interwoven with a secondary code to obscure its contents further. Progress was slow, and realizing that language might play a role, I reached out to a trusted friend, a linguist familiar with both military codes and archaic languages. With his help, we managed to parse out portions of broken English embedded within. Some phrases were recognizable, though distorted, while others appeared to be technical jargon or procedural terms used in military communications. The mix of broken English and coded sequences hinted at a complex origin. The more we uncovered, the more unsettling it became. This was no random signal. It was highly structured and encoded, likely originating from a source with advanced technology. The implications were hard to ignore. This was a deliberate message, crafted to conceal its true nature, and whoever sent it did not expect an outsider to decode it. We intercepted these transmissions over a period of 3 years and learned much about those who were sending it. As we unraveled the transmission, an astonishing narrative began to emerge. The messages detailed a clandestine project initiated by the United States in the early 1980s, a colony on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. This wasn't simply an isolated outpost for scientific study. It was a strategic, high-stakes experiment with distinct Cold War underpinnings. The colony served as a safeguard, a fallback in case of existential threats to humanity. More surprisingly, it was established with the cooperation of a group referred to as the so-called Friends, extraterrestrials who had shared advanced technology and logistical support for the project. The message fragments revealed that this colony wasn't just a survival mechanism, it functioned as an embassy of sorts, a neutral territory to facilitate communication and cooperation between humans and the Friends. In a later broadcast, we managed to figure out that these aliens were genetically closely related to us, as one of the broadcasts contained information about one of the humans who entered a relationship with one of them. The couple apparently had, according to their words, a healthy young boy with blue eyes and white hair, and looked very much like his alien dad. The Cold War context became more apparent as the messages referenced the colony as a security guarantee for U.S. interests, a way to secure human continuity beyond Earth's immediate reach. But as we decoded more, we found evidence that the project had been abandoned. Sometime in the early 2000s, funding and direct support were cut, and communication dwindled. Not long after that, the so-called Friends also withdrew. A handful of humans chose to join the aliens in their withdrawal back to their home world. The rest chose to stay, hoping that NASA and the Pentagon will reignite the project. However, that never happened, and without consistent supplies, maintenance, or transport from the Friends, the colonists were left isolated, struggling to sustain themselves on limited resources. Supplies that were once abundant and essential equipment provided by the Friends were gradually failing. This was not simply a historical account. It was a stark, immediate plea. The inhabitants of this forgotten colony were stranded, with diminishing resources and little hope of rescue. As we decoded the transmissions over the years, the situation of the outpost went from not great to grim. The messages indicated that the outpost was approaching total collapse. Their primary technology, much of it designed and maintained with assistance from the Friends, was failing. Communications equipment was intermittent, food supplies nearly depleted, and essential medical resources long exhausted. The outpost had managed to establish small-scale domed agriculture, but what they could produce fell far short of sustaining the population. It became evident that their current food reserves were barely enough to support them much longer. The most pressing issue appeared to be their power source. They operated a nuclear reactor, a critical component enabling their survival in Titan's extreme conditions. However, reactor maintenance required specialized parts and technical knowledge, both of which the Friends had provided up until a few years prior. For reasons unexplained in the messages, the Friends had abruptly withdrawn support, cutting off transport and abandoning the outpost to fend for itself. Without the necessary parts and expertise, the colonists faced a near impossible choice: keep the reactor running and risk a catastrophic failure, or shut it down and surrender to the cold, lightless void Titan would quickly become. It was a classic survival dilemma, scientifically unsolvable without external resources. These messages read less like reports and more like a final plea, the voices of an outpost on the edge of extinction, abandoned by those who had once assured their security. The decoded messages hinted at limited, sporadic communication with high-ranking U.S. officials, an unusual backchannel that had remained active long after the project's official abandonment. For years, the colonists managed to send updates, detailing their deteriorating conditions and urgently requesting aid. They communicated carefully, knowing that any direct link to the public would raise questions the government likely preferred buried. But these channels remained highly restricted, accessible only to a select few with knowledge of the original mission's scope and classified status. The tone of their messages shifted gradually. Early transmissions conveyed cautious optimism, requests for technical support, and appeals for essential supplies. However, as time went on and their technology further degraded, the appeals became increasingly urgent, even desperate. The colonists openly questioned whether their situation was now being deliberately ignored. Their requests for help had become pleas, their hope diminishing with each unanswered transmission. The underlying issue, as I interpreted it, was logistical. No U.S. agency could reach Titan independently. NASA, already stretched by terrestrial missions and lacking the propulsion technology for such a journey, was unable to mount a retrieval operation without external assistance. The Friends, who had once managed transport and technical aid, had severed contact entirely, leaving the outpost's fate in bureaucratic limbo. Their last messages hinted at resignation, a grim realization that help, though only a transmission away, would never come. The last transmissions I managed to decode were haunting, difficult even for me to process in purely analytical terms. By this point, the colonists had lost all hope of a rescue. Their final messages shifted focus, moving away from requests for technical support or supplies, and instead documenting their names, their lives, and the memories of what they had sacrificed for the outpost. These were no longer structured reports, but deeply personal accounts, testaments of people who knew they were about to be lost to history. It was clear they wanted someone, anyone, to remember them, and the experiment that had left them stranded on a frozen moon far from Earth. Some of the messages included personal goodbyes, written with a raw honesty that felt out of place amid the clinical detachment I'd come to expect from encrypted transmissions. They expressed regrets, some over leaving Earth, others about declining the Friends' invitation to travel to their home world. Instead, they had chosen to remain on Titan, trusting that NASA and the Pentagon would eventually come back for them. Now, all hope was gone. A few messages contained instructions to family members, mementos of what they had done and seen, and warnings about the brutal conditions on Titan. As I continued decoding, my friend, who had been helping with the language, mentioned our project to a colleague in passing. I'm not sure what exactly he said, but it was enough. Soon after, I had a visit from 5 men, claiming to be from the FBI. They displayed credentials and informed me they needed to search my home for illegal transmissions and classified material. I knew something wasn't right from the start. Their manner was professional but unnervingly direct, as though this was a routine sweep. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. As he answered, one of them took the phone from me. He then walked off with it. A few minutes later, he returned, handed it back. My lawyer was still on the call, but all he had to say was, "It would be in your best interest to let them proceed." Then he abruptly hung up. I tried calling back, but there was no response. They confiscated everything. My computers, external hard drives, notebooks, all my recordings and decoded data were taken without further explanation. I'd meticulously documented everything, every fragment and timestamp, every translation my friend and I had painstakingly constructed. And now, all of it was gone. In their final words, the colonists had hoped their story would be preserved. They hadn't expected to be rescued, only remembered. I wish I could honor that. Years have passed since those final transmissions, yet the weight of the outpost story remains with me. I'd buried the experience, knowing that revealing it could lead to consequences I wasn't prepared to face. But I can't ignore the gravity of what I uncovered, a hidden chapter of human history, written on Titan's desolate surface, where humanity once reached beyond Earth, only to abandon those who ventured so far. Their messages were more than data. They were voices, people isolated by both distance and secrecy. These colonists deserve recognition, even if we failed them. Perhaps it's too late to change their fate, but remembering them feels essential. Their existence, brief and concealed, marked a moment when humanity touched the stars, only to withdraw, leaving a handful of souls lost in the silence of space. Thanks for joining us on this eerie journey. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to hit the like button. Let us know your thoughts, or if you've had any strange encounters in the comments below. We love hearing your stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more mysterious and otherworldly tales. And make sure to click the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay safe and keep watching the skies.